So good morning and good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to the quarterly marketing call for the International Lawyers Network's marketing professionals. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping notes. Everyone will be in mute throughout the call, so we encourage you to use the chat box to ask any questions you have, and I'll share those with David as we're talking. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter to you. David is the president of the Accurate Advisory. He's been a business development advisor to law firms since the late 90s and has developed and implemented business development programs for some of the top firms on the AmLaw 100. The Accurate Advisory provides business development coaching and training for service firms and their professionals. And he's also the founder of Practice Bloomers, a business development e-learning program, and winner of 2 Your Honor Awards for excellence in practice development. So without further ado, I will pass it over to David.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. So today's agenda will be as follows. We'll first look at the factors that contribute to the challenges of producing a return on investment from business development training. And then we'll take a look at the results of our 2013 market-wide survey. We did a survey of law firms across the U.S. and Canada on the current state of business development training and the return on investment that law firms were seeing from those initiatives. So we'll share some of those results with you. And then we'll take a look at some internal best practices that are most effective for increasing return on investment. And finally, I'll take a few minutes and show you an outsourced resource, it's Practice Boomers that Lindsay just mentioned, that consistently delivers a return on investment. You may find that the program is of interest to you at your firm, or you may find that some of the principles that we use are things that you want to borrow. But regardless, I think you'll find it to be a unique approach. So let's talk about this idea of training and coaching and mentoring lawyers, especially on the topic of business development. The challenges, and if you're on this webinar, then you know them well, but it's worth touching on them briefly so that we have some context for the program. One is obviously that teaching meaningful business development skills requires time. This isn't just something where you can say, here, so-and-so, just read this blog or just thumb through this book and you'll be a pro in no time. The truth of the matter is that there are people who have MBAs and they're directors of business development, or they head up business development at corporations, or they have dedicated their lives to selling a particular product or service, and they've spent years getting to a place where they can consistently produce a good result. So, it's unrealistic to think that someone can just pick this up overnight, even if they are very smart and very well educated. And so there's this challenge because lawyers obviously need to spend their days on the billable hour, and yet in order for them to acquire what is a fairly sophisticated skill, especially in the marketplace today, we need to somehow manage to get them to turn their focus away from the billable hour long enough to really take on these different skills and apply these strategies and do them meaningfully. Another challenge is that effective strategies require an inordinate amount of tailoring. We're dealing with the fact that no 2 lawyers will approach business development the same way, nor should they. They have different personalities, they have different networks, they have different practice areas, they may have different industry niches that they focus on. So there's a great deal of tailoring that needs to take place. Again, you can't just say, here's the magic bullet, just do this one thing, you'll have clients in no time. So it does require a tailored approach to make sure that the lawyers get what they need to get so that they can deliver the results that they want to achieve. Also, business development metrics can be very difficult to track. We're talking about something that is essentially an intangible. We're talking about having a lunch with someone. We're talking about giving a presentation. We're talking about doing a site visit. Ultimately, these are conversations that you're having with prospective clients or referral sources. It's very hard to measure all of that and translate that into hard data unless you're using some sort of technological platform, and even then there are challenges. So that's one of the things that I know a lot of business development trainers, both in-house and outsourced, try to get their arms around, and not always successfully. And then there's the biggest one, right? We're dealing with lawyers, and I'm married to a lawyer. I love lawyers. I spend my life working with lawyers, so I'm not here to say anything negative about lawyers, but we do see that they have a hard time implementing the training, and this is, again, not a criticism of them. It's really just how the profession is designed. It's very difficult for them to turn their attention away from client matters and turn their attention onto something that is going to, yes, help them in the long run, but their consistent focus is simply not something that's all that available. So we have that challenge if we expect to have them focus on something like business development training. Then we have another challenge, which is the lawyer personality. So this is based on a study conducted by Altman Weil. Some of you may have seen this. Over 1,000 lawyers were assessed using what they called the Caliper Profile Personality Test. And how they got 1,000 lawyers to fill out a personality profile test is for a topic for another webinar. I imagine they probably went to a couple of the large firms and did a firm-wide initiative. But the results were really interesting. And you may recognize some of your lawyer colleagues in these results. So what they saw was that this is a population, by and large, that rates very high on urgency. So the way the Caliber test works is they would take the general public and use them as a bench line at 50%, and then they would compare the lawyer results that they got from these surveys to how the general public tends to rate on the Caliper profile. And what they saw is lawyers were really high on urgency. This is a population that is very results-oriented. They seek efficiency and economy. This is not a group of people who just wants to, trust the journey and see how the process plays out. They want to get to the end of this thing. They seek the end product over process. And they can be perceived as brusque because they're in a hurry to get to the bottom line here. They don't have a lot of time or patience for dilly-dallying or for, one step at a time. They want to get to the end result. We also see that they rate very high on autonomy. What does that mean? Well, this is a group that prefers to approach challenges on their own time and terms. They don't necessarily like being told what to do, and they believe themselves to be exceptional. They have a certain worldview that says lawyers in general are an exceptional population. Only a lawyer can truly understand me, and I myself have a unique way of looking at the world, and it's an exceptional way of looking at the world. So these kinds of views came out of this profile. They're also more comfortable with knowing than learning. Obviously, that's a challenge if we're talking about training. But this is a group, you can understand, their clients turn to them to have the answer, not to tell them, oh, well, let me think about it and let me do some research and maybe I'll get back to you. Now, oftentimes lawyers have to say that if they don't have the answer, but they'd much rather just have the right answer and tell their client right away, oh, here it is. This is what you're looking for. Now, on the flip side, lawyers did not rate so well on resilience. This is a group that is reluctant to try new things, especially if the likelihood of failure is high. Their motto is not, if at first you don't succeed, try again. If an initiative doesn't pay off the first time, it probably won't be given a second chance. You get one shot with lawyers most of the time, and if that shot fails, then forget it, we're moving on. Also, sociability, lawyers rated very low here. This is a group that is reluctant to show any kind of emotional vulnerability. They rely on existing relationships rather than seeking out new ones. And they prefer an intellectual connection over an emotional one. Obviously, they've invested a great deal of their lives honing their intellect, educating themselves. That's the arena in which they are most comfortable. So here we are with low ratings on things like patience, compliance, resilience, and sociability. But let's be fair to our lawyer friends. They rated exceptionally high on things like intelligence, education. They're a very analytical group, very articulate, strategic, practical, hardworking. We know this about the lawyer population, definitely decisive, detail-oriented. So there are a lot of things that they are very good at, and those are the things that tie into good lawyering for the most part. You want your lawyer to be somewhat risk-averse. If the entrepreneur comes to the lawyer and says, hey, I'm thinking of this really crazy idea, let's bet the company on it, you want your lawyer to be the person who says, no, I think that's not such a good idea. Let's take a step back. Let's think this through. Let's be a little more conservative, not so hasty. So that makes for good lawyering. But it doesn't necessarily make for good business development, because when we're talking about business development, it requires a long lead time before you get results. The lunch you have with that prospective client today may not manifest into anything for 3, 5, 10 years. And only then, if you continue to follow up and knock on that door politely and respectfully and be aware of the fact that there may be some rejection somewhere along the way. It won't always feel like a win. The business development training requires learning new skills, so that's not so good if you are not a particularly compliant person, or as the Calipers test tells us, your autonomy is very high. In terms of low resilience, as I said, it's trial by error exploration. You're going to have to keep trying things different ways until you find your unique approach, the thing that's going to work best for you, your network, your practice area. And sociability, business development is all about relationship building. You're building relationships with referral sources. You're building relationship internally at your firm with people to whom you can cross-sell. You're building relationships with prospective and existing clientele. So all of that is a bit of a challenge if you'd rather just be behind a desk drafting briefs. So there we have it. For this population, BD training is hard. It's also necessary. In this new marketplace, lawyers are valued more than ever on their ability to originate a book of business. Being a good lawyer is not enough anymore. We all know this. If you want to become a partner at your firm, an equity partner, certainly. If you want to even stay at your firm, at some firms, this is an absolute mandate. And if associates expect to really work their way up the ranks, they need to be able to demonstrate that they can contribute to the top line of the firm. So another thing that I thought I would share with you here is we recently had a managing partner roundtable. These were managing partners from mostly regional firms, so they were all the way up to about 500 lawyers, but from sort of 100-ish to 500-ish. And we asked them this question: what percent of your lawyers are finders, right, versus grinders or minders? And they said, well, we'll tell you, 10% are natural rainmakers. There isn't much we need to do about this. They're going to do it just because that's their personality. And they don't necessarily need training. It just seems to come to them naturally. 30% are career grinders. They really are never going to bring in any business. We see them sort of as service lawyers or foot soldiers in the grand scheme of things. They have their place, but they're never going to have a seat at the table, so to speak, when it comes to the people who are making decisions about the direction of the firm, especially financially. So that leaves the 60%. And we asked them, well, what are those people? And they said potential business getters. They have potential. We're not going to bet any money on them that they're going to necessarily be rainmakers, but they certainly have potential and they aren't grinders. And so, of course, the natural question that we followed up with is, what's the best use of the firm's resources to capitalize the potential of the 60%? And they said the right combination of willingness, mentorship, coaching, and training. So they acknowledge that coaching, training, mentorship, of course, willingness, all play a critical role in the firm harnessing this significant asset that it has. But without these things, that asset will lie dormant. This is not a group, as we said, who are just naturally going to run out there and do their best to get business. They require some prodding. They require encouragement. And so that's why coaching and training becomes such a critical part of a firm's strategy. Now, as I promised, I want to share a little bit about a market-wide survey that we did. This was last year. We do this survey every year. And at the end of this webinar, we'll invite you to participate in the 2014 survey if you're interested, and then we'll share the white paper that we tie to this survey with you. But anyway, last year, we conducted a market-wide survey of law firms across the U.S. and Canada. We wanted to determine the ROI from their various business development training initiatives. And we learned some really interesting things. Now, we weren't necessarily shocked by what we learned, but it validated some of the things that we had seen, and it was good to get the data in front of us. So let me share some of it with you. Just so you know, there were over 2,000 professionals who implement or oversee training from over 500 firms. So lawyers, marketing professionals, business development professionals, and PD professionals. Boutique under 50 firms, as well as large firms over 1,000, all participated in this survey. In terms of the response percentages, in terms of law firms with over 1,000 lawyers, there were 6% there. As you see, the largest slice of the pie was this sort of sort of small to mid-sized regional firm, and we had a lot of responses from the under hundreds as well. This makes sense if you just look at the landscape of law firms out there. As the law firms get larger, the number of lawyers at those firms, as the number of lawyers go up, the number of firms who have that many lawyers goes down. So this represents that. So the first question we asked in this survey is, well, what kind of business development training do you provide? And the options were, is there internal coaching or external coaching? In other words, is your internal marketing or business development team doing the coaching, or is this something that you're outsourcing to a coaching company of some sort or a coaching professional? And then do you use sales webinars or trainers? You bring them in from the outside to train different techniques via webinar, office to office, that sort of thing. And then finally, formal mentorship. Do you pair your lawyers with more senior lawyers at the firm in the hopes that some business development acumen will be passed along? And what we saw was that, those are those definitions. What we saw is that 71% of the firms surveyed are using some sort of internal coaching. This was by far the most popular way that firms are dealing with this issue of business development training and coaching. They're basically saying to their marketing managers or their business development professionals, they're saying, here, I want you to meet with these lawyers, sit down with them, try to help them come up with a plan, try to help them, troubleshoot whatever it is that's getting in their way. There was a large number of firms that are still using some sort of external coaching, whether that's an individual or a group of people who come in and do this sort of coaching. Quite a few are still using sales webinar and training, and formal mentorship was actually the lowest. Now, we did make sure that we were making a distinction here. This isn't just, is it okay for an associate to tap on the partner's door and say, hey, do you got a minute? I want to talk to you about something. This is a formal program where the lawyers are paired up. There's some kind of expectation in place in terms of how often they meet, what they talk about, that sort of thing. So that's why I think that number was a little bit lower. What we saw is that most law firms are utilizing or plan to utilize multiple forums for business development training. So it's not just one. It's not just internal coaching and that's it. And 95% of respondents utilize or are gearing up to utilize at least two. 69% 3, 28% are utilizing all four. So then we asked, so which of these are most popular? And we saw that internal coaching is certainly most popular across the board at firms that are either small, 50 or fewer lawyers, or very large, over 1,000 lawyers. At the over 1,000 lawyer mark, internal coaching is being used across the board. There is no firm out there, at least who participated in our survey, that isn't using this, and that shouldn't surprise people. We have a whole platoon of marketers and business development professionals at those large firms that are being put to use by way of coaching being at least part of their responsibility. And then in terms of external coaching, those numbers go down a bit, although toward the when we're looking at smaller firms, like under 300 lawyers, it's a little bit more, it's a little bit closer to the internal coaching number. And this was interesting. Mentorship wasn't being used at all in the smaller firms in any kind of structured way. It was being used quite a bit at this sort of 100 to 300 lawyer firm, and then it took a dip. From 300 to 1,000, there was only 14% doing any kind of structured mentorship. But in the over 1,000, of course, there are multiple initiatives and structures all over the place being used. And then finally, we looked at this notion of sales and webinar training and saw that it basically scales up. As the firm grows, there's more of that being used. The larger the firm, the more likely that it offers these broader training initiatives because, of course, they have multiple offices that they're trying to get their arms around, and technology is a good way of accomplishing that. Now we got to what I at least consider to be the good part. Let's talk about return on investment because, great, we're doing training, and we should be doing training. We know that, but what is it getting us? How are we benefiting from it? So what we saw, what we saw is that let's see. Yeah, here's what we're looking for. So these are how they're measuring it. they're measuring it either, you see on this first column, through increased origination credit or new matters opened, or in the second column, increased business development activity. All we're measuring is, are our lawyers busier when it comes to business development? We're not actually measuring what they're bringing in or trying to tie that to their activity. We just want to know that they're doing more. But the most popular measurement, by and large, was anecdotal. You know, we're just asking them, are you getting anything out of this training? And those numbers were high. In fact, it was pretty consistent across the board. I shouldn't say those were the highest numbers. And then in terms of positive ROI, so this is what they actually were able to report in terms of return on investment. These numbers were obviously not so high. So internal coaching rated the lowest. Yes, we have our marketing professionals coaching our lawyers, but we don't have a lot that we can point to and say that, well, yeah, we're definitely seeing a positive ROI. We're looking at these various things, like increased originations, increased BD activity, anecdotal, but ultimately we're only able to confirm by a margin of 12% that it's working. Let me just go through a couple of these others. External coaching rated a little bit higher, probably not that surprising because external coaches, just for their own survival, need to circle back and say, you know, did we do something that made a difference for you here? And they were able to bring a better number to the table, although not a great number. Sales training, again, a little bit higher. Formal mentorship was also right up there. Internal coaching did the poorest on this particular question. So if we lay this out, what we see is that internal coaching is being used the most. Over 70% of firms are using internal coaching, but the reported ROI is the lowest there. External coaching and sales training are pretty much neck and neck. What's interesting is that mentorship, while it's not being used very much, the relative ROI is pretty good. So if you're only going to do one of these, it seems that mentoring with lawyers who are a little more senior and have had a little more time will ultimately get you a better ROI in terms of what the firm is able to report as a result. So that's our market-wide survey and what we learned from it. It also gave us the idea of distributing some best practices that we've learned through coaching and training for many years inside of law firms. So I'll share some of those with you in case you have business development training initiatives or you're considering some, and you're looking to know what it is that has been successful that will help you to make sure that your ROI is high. Give me a moment here. I'm going to get a drink of water. Okay. So first, select willing trainees. You want to make sure that the firm-wide training initiatives are matched according to the lawyers who have an appetite for them. We find that those firms who just say everybody, you know, we don't want to ruffle any political feathers here, so everybody gets the training. We find that ultimately the ROI is very low for that because not everybody wants the training. Not everybody's interested in business development. Again, back to that ratio that the managing partners shared of 10% natural rainmakers, 30% hopeless grinders. Don't bother with them in terms of this. They're not interested, and it's just trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But there's that 60% who hopefully most of those have some appetite for this, and they just need the right training, coaching, mentoring. So those are the people to focus this sort of initiative on. Pilot programs with early adopters so that they can spread the news inside the firm. Hey, listen, I did this pilot program. It was pretty good. Obviously, you'll survey the lawyers on their experience, and then that gives you a sense of whether or not they not only liked it, but also whether or not they're likely to tell colleagues about it and start to create a bit of a buzz. As we know, lawyers tend to look to other lawyers to see what might be appropriate for them per the caliper profile test that I shared with you earlier. Second best practice, establish a baseline metric against which you will compare results. This is, I think, a mistake a lot of training programs make, which is that they just start the training. You know, they get some interest from the lawyers, and they put them in a room, and they start talking to them, or they start coaching them, and they don't actually have a baseline against which they're comparing these results. So all they're left with is anecdotal, and even that anecdotal feedback is very subjective. It's basically how does the lawyer feel now versus how did they feel on the first day of training, and they just try to remember how they felt. We're getting some feedback here. They try to remember how they felt on that day and then try to compare their feeling now to that. So it's not exactly scientific, but if you can get some sort of baseline metric in place, and I'll share with you some options for that, then you're going to have something that's a little more akin to hard data. For pre-originating lawyers, so these are lawyers that don't yet have a book of business, identify meaningful leading indicators to evaluate effectiveness of training rather than rely on feel-good evaluations. So what might that look like? A leading indicator, a meaningful leading indicator, this means something that they're doing that you know will lead to business. So it's an indicator of incoming business. One might be something like received an incoming referral. So if they're tracking the number of incoming referrals that they received, that is leading to business. We all know it's just a numbers game. If they receive enough incoming referrals, sooner or later those referrals will translate into business. So if we can start tracking the number of incoming referrals that they are receiving, and that number goes up, then that tells us that something is working. Did they establish a key contact? We need to define what that is. A key contact could be in-house counsel. It could be a meaningful referral source. But the more of these key contacts they establish, the more of a network they're putting in place that will be able to convert into a pipeline. Did they forward a key contact? Again, we want to define a key contact, but and we also may want to define what forward means. But it could just mean take one out to lunch. It could just mean give them an introduction or a referral. Anything that moves the needle on that relationship and earns a little more loyalty with some of the key people that will ultimately translate into business down the road. Have they contributed a referral or an introduction to a key contact? Very easy thing to measure. And finally, client site visits. These, we also know, translate eventually into business. It's just a matter of time and developing relationships on site. So these are some of the things that can be measured, particularly as you're going through a training program, encouraging lawyers to do these things. And you'll find that as they do more and more of them, it will translate into results for them as they play these numbers games. Another best practice, tailor strategies to the lawyer's leverage points. Now, what we mean by leverage points is that every lawyer has a particular set of strengths. We use something called a leverage point finder in our practice boomers program to identify these. But basically, we look over at the left here, this left-hand column that says venue. It shows group settings, parties, mixers, that sort of thing. That might be one particular lawyer's leverage point. And then we say one-on-one meetings. That might be another one, or public speaking. Now, we recognize that a lawyer, it's unlikely that they will resonate with all of these. There's probably one or another that they resonate with more. So what we say is rate on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being that you don't do particularly well in this venue, 5 being that you do very well in this venue. And what we end up with is a series of scores. So let's say the lawyer gives themselves a 2 in group settings. You know what, I'm kind of a wallflower. I don't really like going to parties, and I'm probably not going to meet anyone useful there because I'm going to find an excuse to leave early. But then we ask them, all right, well, what is your potential leverage rating? I mean, if you brought a wingman or if you had the setting was a little more intimate, do you think you could get used to that? And if they rate themselves a higher number, like they say, let's say a 4, then that truly is a potential leverage point for them. That with a little bit of training, a little bit of experience, a little bit of time in the saddle, they will be able to translate that into something meaningful. So what we do is essentially after they go through this worksheet, we ask them to circle the 4s and the 5s. Those are all their leverage points. And for each of those 4s and 5s, they put in a next step. And the next step is basically, you know, what's your action item? What are you going to do in order to either raise this leverage rating for yourself, or perhaps even just get out there and start doing it because you recognize that if you get a few more of these under your belt, you will be more proficient with them. So for instance, an action item might be something like, well, I did put public speaking as a potential leverage rating for myself, so I guess I'm going to do some CLE presentations, or maybe I'm going to identify a panel where I can profile a recent matter. Or if they said writing is a good leverage point for me, then great. The action item might be, okay, let's try an article or a blog once a month. One-on-one meetings, they may say something like, Client visits once a month, I think I can commit to that. That's not too unrealistic. If group networking, like mixers or something, was one of their leverage points, we might give them the action item of, all right, well, let's try a hosted monthly supper club where you can identify a group of people and you can host them at a nearby restaurant or someplace like that, and that way it's a controlled environment and you'll raise that leverage score of yours. Social media, fine. Let's get you on LinkedIn and searching to touch base with some key contacts once a month. If that's one of the metrics that we're measuring, then those also count against the tracking that we're doing as part of the training. So another best practice is using group psychology to increase accountability. We all know that lawyers, they're very busy. They prioritize, they're very client-centric. They prioritize the billable hour in their work for their clients. So even if you have a great coaching or training session with a lawyer and the lawyer leaves with a laundry list of things that they really ought to do so that they can improve the number of client site visits or increase the number of contacts in their database, we know that there's a pretty good chance that the next time we see them, their response will be, oh, yeah, I got too busy for that. I didn't do it. So it's difficult to hold a lawyer accountable to something that ultimately they're not getting paid for right now. They're getting paid for their billable hour right now. So one of the things that we find is that group forums of lawyers at the same firm help to establish a little more accountability. Lawyers care very much what their colleagues think of them, how they are perceived by the others at their firm, the other lawyers especially. So if they're having a meeting with other lawyers, they're much more likely to show up prepared for that meeting than if they're having a meeting with a marketing professional or with an outside consultant. So we try to set these group forums up. It's good cross-selling potential there. There's good discussion at the table. The lawyers can debate the various strategies until they hone in on one that works well for them. They can share metrics so that leverages a little healthy competition, a little peer pressure. We know that lawyers resonate well with a competitive environment. And it introduces repercussions and rewards. Most of them are social, but no lawyer wants to show up to a meeting with egg on their face being the slacker 3 meetings in a row. So it starts to create some meaning around these business development metrics. They all want to show up to the table as a winner. So this sets up that dynamic of this is what a winner looks like in these business development group meetings. It's also useful to set up symbolic monetary incentives. We've seen even a $20 gift card or dinner for 2 at a restaurant, something that may not make a big difference in the grand scheme of things financially for the lawyer, but they just want to win the prize. They're just interested in being the one who got that. So a symbolic monetary incentive tied to some of these metrics can have a positive effect. Formal acknowledgement certainly helps if the managing partner or the practice group leader walks into the room and says, I want to take a moment and acknowledge Beth. Beth's scores have been really high in this training program, or she's done the most number of client site visits over the last 2 months, and that really bears mentioning because it shows that Beth is really taking her career and her business development seriously. The other lawyers may act aloof, like they don't care about that, but believe me, they noticed. And in that moment, Beth's status went up a peg, and they want theirs to go up a peg. So to the extent that they can motivate themselves, they will. Also, perhaps since we looked earlier at mentorships being one of those things that can really help to boost results, perhaps we make those earned. So rather than just pairing people up into a structured mentorship program, we say you can earn that if you reach certain criteria based on this training program or based on the things that we're tracking. I think lawyers like the idea of being mentored for the most part, and if that ends up being rather something that's just handed them on a silver platter but something that they have to earn, they'll also take it more seriously, and they will lean into it a little more. Another best practice, reimagine training as a fitness program. Now this may seem like a corny idea, but I'll tell you, it really does work, and the metaphor is pretty close to how things really play out. So you want to set expectations early at the associate level. You can't just start working out at the age of 60 and expect yourself to whip into shape. This has to be something that you've been doing all along. So you're always in a BD training program of some sort at this firm. It's just part of the culture. To the extent that your firm is amenable to that kind of an idea, obviously you can shift the training and make it more sophisticated as they go up through their career, but you don't want to throw an 8th-year associate into a BD program and expect them to have a book of business 2 or 3 years later as a junior partner. It's just not going to happen. We all know that the lead time requires a lot more preparation and seed planting than that. Introduce long-term training initiatives. Don't expect one-off workshops or seminars or webinars to yield a sustainable behavior change. It doesn't work that way. You can't just have someone come in and do a lunch and learn, and then suddenly your lawyers have shifted their mindset and they're going to go out and do things that they were either afraid or resigned or too busy to do before that presentation. So try to tie these different initiatives together so it feels a little more like a curriculum, or it feels like there's a through line. You're really taking them on a journey through a series of experiences that are hopefully going to shift their behavior. That's the key. We want business development to become a part of the way that they think every day. It's a habit. It's like brushing your teeth. You can't get through the day without doing it. So when you reach that point, you've truly accomplished something. But if you're just expecting to cobble together occasional one-offs, you're going to find that 60% really just doesn't respond to it all that well. And we already talked about that. Scaffolding the sophistication, that is to say, weaving and building sophistication as you sort of move through the tiers of a training program at a firm. Next, best practice, use a multimodal approach to accommodate learning styles. What does that mean? Well, different people learn different ways. There have been countless studies done on this in the education sector. So what we know is that multimodal learning, that is to say, learning that translates different modalities. It's not just I'm going to talk to you. It may also involve a video where you can see something, or it may involve experiential where we're going to role play something, or it may involve auditory where you're going to listen to a podcast of an interview, or it may be reading an article because they're going to absorb it through reading more than they are through watching something. So everybody learns a little bit differently, and when you introduce multimodal learning, it increases retention and implementation by 31%, which is pretty significant if you think about it. I mean, if you take someone through a lunch and learn and you give them 10 different points, and we know how human nature tends to be. If they're lucky, they grab onto one of them and they walk out, and then if we ask them 2 weeks later, they still remember that one. They've forgotten the other 9. But if we could increase that by 31%, well then maybe they have 2, or maybe they even have 3 different things that they walk out with, and that gives us a significant return on the energy that one invests in a lunch and learn or any kind of training initiative. Also, introduce multimedia into programs. We're in the 21st century. Let's start using 21st century tools. Again, we're seeing this rise of webinars, a platform being used more and more inside of law firms to train inter-office skills, from office to office, BD skills. And so to the extent that you haven't started doing that, we really would encourage you to use technology as much as possible. Blend internal resources with outside consultants for concept validation, extracultural perspective, innovation, and accountability. Lawyers do tend to tune out something that they hear over and over again from the same person. So bringing in a different perspective always helps. There is that perception that the outside consultant somehow has more expertise than the internal person might, and certainly outside consultants see a range of situations at the different firms that they work with, so they can bring that kind of extracultural perspective into the mix. We also find that there is a higher likelihood that a lawyer will follow through on a commitment made to an external consultant. Maybe it goes back to that personal trainer idea, but I know for me personally, when I go to the gym, if I don't have a personal trainer, my workout is my workout. If I've hired a personal trainer to take me through a rigorous workout, I'm going to do the rigorous workout. It's not like I'm going to waste that money or waste that person's time. So there is something to be said for that external resource. Include facilitated peer-to-peer forums so that your lawyers get out of their heads and into a regular, productive discussion. So whether it's one-on-one, you have a buddy system at your firm, or whether it's based on something a little more structured like one of the earlier best practices, get them out of their head. That's the key. Get them into dialogue. Lawyers like to talk things out. They like to crystallize ideas into language, and then they like to test those ideas and debate them until they finally have bounced them around enough that they feel like, okay, this idea is kind of bulletproof. I'm comfortable moving forward with this idea. Again, it ties back into the fact that this is a risk-averse group of people, and they're not just going to take some idea and run with it. They're probably going to want to test it out a little bit first. What better way to test it out than in dialogue with a trusted colleague? Next best practice, isolate multiple training programs from one another to ensure an accurate cost-benefit analysis. So what that means is, if a lawyer at your firm, in the morning they have a coaching session with one of your marketing professionals. In the afternoon, they have a lunch and learn that they go to where there's a bunch of different lawyers from that particular practice group that gets a presentation from someone else at the firm or from an outside consultant. And then in the late afternoon, they hop onto a webinar and they learn something else. Obviously, we have a problem here. This lawyer has way too much time on their hands. But the other problem you're going to find is that the lawyer now has a hard time tying any kind of ROI to the program. Where did they get this from? Did it come from the coaching session? Did it come from the webinar? So to the extent that you can focus these initiatives on a particular subset of lawyers, you'll then be able to mark and say, oh, look, these lawyers did much better, and now we know why. We can point to this one particular initiative. It's not just, well, we threw them into the pool, and somewhere along the line, they managed to figure out how to swim. Best practice number 9, utilize technology to augment training and experience, capture BD metrics, and confirm trainee engagement. So again, let's move into the 21st century. It's time to integrate our CRM platforms into our training. Let's use e-learning as much as possible. Let's not just rely on good old-fashioned, seminars or whatever it is that might have been used in the past. Not to say there's anything wrong with those modalities, but we just have so much more available to us now. And I'm going to show you a little bit about Practice Boomers, which is an example of how we're using technology to accomplish some of these things. So here's the agenda so far, just to remind you, understand the factors that contribute to the challenges. We did that. Results of our 2013 market-wide survey, I shared that. And I shared with you some internal best practices that are most effective for increasing ROI. I just want to take a moment before we move into the Practice Boomers piece and ask if there are any questions. So Lindsay, if there are any questions so far, please let me know. From this view, it's hard for me to see the chat box.
Sure. Actually, a couple had come in.
Great.
You talked about the percentages of grinders versus rainmakers versus that 60% sort of could go either way. And the question is, are the grinders really, or the people in that 60% who are not going to end up as rainmakers, really self-selecting through their willingness or lack thereof? Or are there people who may be willing to do the business development training, but who really are more falling into that grinder mentality?
No, I think when we had this discussion, obviously it was a much more involved discussion with the managing partners, but what they said was that when we say grinders, we really mean they use the word hopeless. Right? And they say, they kind of characterize this person as being an introvert. They just want to sit behind a desk. They're really uncomfortable with people. They're much more comfortable with words and with, and they really just don't have any interest in business development. So that was that 30% of the grinders. And then, there's that 60% that is not hopeless, but they're not natural rainmakers either. And so they may have some willingness, but they also may have some reservation. The reservation may look something like, gosh, I just don't know how to be successful at this, and I don't want to do anything that I'm not going to be successful with. Or it may be something like they have an opinion, like, business development is just so hard. Or I look at, Larry, who's one of our top rainmakers at the firm, And Larry doesn't have a life because he's, spending 24 hours a day doing all this stuff with his prospective clients and going to breakfasts and mixers. I don't want to be Larry. So we have to get them over that opinion, that hurdle, that it doesn't have to look that way. It can look a whole number of ways, and that, it has to be tailored to you. So many times it really is a coaching conversation or a mentoring conversation that can help the lawyer understand that they don't have to stay stuck in that 60%. They can move their way up and at least maximize their potential. They may never be a, quote, rainmaker, but they can certainly start bringing business into the firm. And that was the distinction that the managing partners were trying to make.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions before we move on?
No, we can go ahead.
Okay, great. So let's take a quick look at this. Again, this is our program that uses technology to accomplish a lot of the things that we've just talked about, our typical challenges when it comes to business development. And I'm going to just flip over to my browser here. So this is Practice Boomers, and it's a hybrid of e-learning and group coaching, that same group dynamic that we talked about, where there's a group of lawyers at your firm, and they're having a discussion, and it's facilitated by someone who holds them accountable and makes sure that they're having productive dialogue about how to create a business development plan for themselves and implement it. So the e-learning piece works like this. At the top here, you see this is our lesson bar. There are 52 lessons in the curriculum, and the lessons all build on each other. So we start with basic blocking and tackling, like how to create business development into a habit, how to create SMART goals for your practice development, moving into leverage points, which we just shared with you so that you can identify what are your strengths. And each of these lessons take the form of a short 5-minute video. The idea being that this is a very smart population. They don't need a lot of time to learn these things. The truth is a lot of lawyers don't have the patience, or they have ADD or whatever they have, and so they're not going to sit through an hour-long webinar give their undivided attention anyway. They're going to spend 45 minutes of that hour on the BlackBerry. So let's just get to the essence of it. Here is the bottom line, if you will, for this particular distinction, this particular concept. And I'll play you a couple minutes of the video so that you get a sense of how we approach it. We try to keep it entertaining and easy to digest, and we do it just within a few minutes. So this is the very first lesson of the curriculum. Welcome to your first Practice Boomers lesson. In Rainmaker Habits, you're going to start training yourself to act like a rainmaker. We use the word training because that really is what it will take. There's no magic pill you can swallow to get there overnight. You have to develop habits that will yield the results you want. Here's the problem. You already have habits. We all do. We have certain patterns and behaviors that have gotten us this far in life. But chances are they aren't rainmaker habits, because rainmaker habits yield rainmaker results. Let's establish some for you and start implementing them so you can get to where you want to go. The key here is in the choices you make when it comes to managing your time. What are your daily rituals? Do you start off the day by checking emails? Do you tend to work through lunch? Or do you like to grab a bite with your best friend from the office? Or maybe some other habit you're not so proud of. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of these habits, but it's important to consider whether or not they're serving your goals. Let's start with your morning ritual. You see, if you always start every day with email, you're immediately entering a reactive work mode. Your email inbox is like a to-do list assigned by 100 people, none of whose immediate concern is whether or not you bring in new clients. And email is typically the gateway to an entire day spent in that reactive mode. Now, you're in the service industry, so of course you'll tend to your clients' needs. But it's very easy to fall into the trap of serving their needs all day long without ever getting around to yours. If this sounds even remotely familiar, try something new. Before you open your inbox in the morning, start your day with a rainmaker habit. Maybe it's the action step you've gotten from your last lesson. Maybe it's reviewing a list of prospects you've recently collected. Or maybe it's inviting a colleague out to lunch to see if there's any potential for referrals there. If on any given morning you draw a blank, just log on to Practice Boomers. The interviews, articles, and lessons are great proactive resources. But regardless of where the strategy comes from, start your day doing something proactive that serves your goals? Because chances are you won't find the time for it once the day gets started. Okay, we'll stop there. You get the point. So we're almost halfway through the lesson, and we've already delivered a key activity here. Every lesson ends with a couple of action items so that it's not just talking about concepts and theories. It's bottom lining it for the lawyers. As we know, lawyers want to know, tell me what to do here. What am I supposed to, don't make me think too hard about how to apply this. Show me the bottom line. And then not every lesson, but many of them end with these worksheets where we ask lawyers a couple of quick questions. And this helps us get some of this data that we're looking for. So this one asks some of the basic things like how many non-billable hours are you spending with a client on an average week, like site visits, taking them out to lunch, that sort of thing. Another question is how many new referral sources do you meet in an average week? These are just the kinds of metrics that we're trying to capture so that we can inform the tracker. And the tracker is basically a way to identify how their activity is trending over time. So the blue line is the baseline that we had just established with those questions we asked. The yellow line is their daily log. Now, sometimes the lawyers do this, sometimes they don't. We all know that getting lawyers to fill out their daily activity can be hit or miss. But we still have some data based on their response, and this is also something that can be filled out in those regular group meetings that they have with their colleagues. But regardless, the key is to get the data so that you can have a sense of, are we increasing business development activity here, and can we tie that activity to a rising trend in new matters opened over time? So this tracker ends up being one of the things that gets reported to the firm, and obviously the things that are tracked vary from firm to firm. You can track how many pitch meetings they've gone on or whatever it is that the firm it ties into the firm's strategy. So that's one of the things that gets reported up to firm management and the marketers so they can see how their lawyers are doing. The other thing that it does is, as they're going through these worksheets, it populates their briefcase. Their briefcase is their business development plan at a glance. And that's useful as well because now you have a sense of their goals in real time. These are the things that they're currently working on, the book of business that they intend to accomplish by the end of the year, the organizations that they intend to join, the skills that they are looking to improve, the relationships that they're going to focus on. Here's some of the strategies that they're going to be focused on. Here are a few of their prospects and their key referral sources. And then this is their business development to-do list. Obviously, this is really useful for the marketing department to have because they have a sense of not necessarily that business development template that may have gotten filled out a year or so ago and probably hasn't been looked at since, but where is the lawyers thinking now based on the last video they watched and the last worksheet that they completed. All the worksheets just take a couple of seconds to fill out. The videos take a few minutes to watch. So again, it's very manageable. They get a video every few days. Every 5 days or so, there's a new video to watch. And they are in these group masterminds about 2 times a month. So again, it's a very manageable but consistent program that we track over time, over a 9-month period. And we find that we're consistently able to identify a return on investment for law firms. Again, because we aren't doing the one-offs where it's very difficult to track any kind of result. We're tracking things like their activity, their goals. We're tracking their new matters. So it's very easy for us to say, oh, look, their trend of new matters spiked considerably once they started getting into this program. And the return on the firm is much higher than whatever they've invested in their lawyers being in the program. A couple of other quick things that we find to be really useful. Again, we were pointing to the fact that mentorship is something that lawyers really resonate with. So we have something called Rainmakers and Experts interviews. These are interviews with lawyers from various firms across the U.S. and Canada. They're all rainmakers in their own right. They've built multi-million-dollar books of business, or it's in-house counsel talking about how to improve relationships with them. So this is key information, and it's good virtual mentorship for lawyers who are trying to learn how to accomplish some of the things that these people have accomplished. And then the only other thing here is quick tips. If all you have is 20 seconds, we have a blog roll in here with a business development tip, and these will always be available to the lawyers to just pick up a quick new idea on the run. So that's how the program ties together, and why I wanted to share it with you, because as I say, you may find that you use you already have something in place and that this helps you augment it, or you may find that you really are looking for a training solution that accomplishes a lot of the things that we talked about in our agenda today, and that you're interested in something that will address some of these challenges and start to give you some data and ultimately metrics and a return on investment for your effort. So that takes us to the end of our program today. We do have a little more time for questions, but I also wanted to invite you to participate in our 2014 survey. Again, this is the same market-wide survey, and we already have a few of the answers to those questions in, and we're seeing that some of the marketplace is trending in a new direction. So it's not surprising. The marketplace is changing very quickly, and business development training is becoming more and more the new normal. So we hope that you will take a moment and fill out the survey. I think Lindsay's going to send out a follow-up email with that link. And then if you do so, we'll send you the white paper that we create out of our results from the survey. We'd love to have you both participating, and we'd love to be able to share what we've learned with you. So that concludes my prepared remarks. Lindsay, are there any other questions that have come in?
No, that was great. Thank you so much. And as David said to everyone else, I'll be sending out the survey link in my follow-up email, and I'll also make this recording available to everybody. So if you wanted to watch it again, feel free to do that. So thank you again, David. This was really great.
So glad that you had me on the program, and thank you all for being on the program with us today.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.